That's what you get for being so selfish. It's time they learn who I really am.
The slap landed before I even had the chance to breathe. A sharp crack echoed through the grand ballroom as my glasses flew from my face, skidding across the polished marble and shattering under the glow of the chandeliers. 130 guests froze in perfect silence, their champagne glasses suspended in midair, their whispers strangled in their throats. My cheek burned like fire, but the true pain was lodged deep inside my chest. On her wedding day, in her flawless gown, my daughter-in-law Juliet had raised her hand against me. She struck me not for some insult or offense, but because I refused to hand her the keys to my apartment. "That's what you get for being so selfish," she spat, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "A woman your age doesn't need so much space." The stillness that followed was suffocating. I crouched, trembling, trying to gather the broken pieces of my glasses as shards bit into my palm. Not a soul moved to help me. Some guests turned their faces away, their shame painted in avoidance. Others leaned toward one another, their murmurs like poison dripping into the air. But none had the courage to defend the poor old mother-in-law who had just been humiliated in front of them all. My son Ethan, my only son, stood motionless, his eyes fixed on the floor, his lips pressed shut, as if erasing me from existence with his silence. "You're not welcome here anymore," Juliet continued, smoothing the silk folds of her pristine wedding gown as though nothing had happened. "Ethan and I need our privacy to start our new life. Your apartment would be perfect for us while we shop for something better." Her words were venom wrapped in lace. For months she had ridiculed my faded dresses, sneered at my old car, mocked my quiet life. But this moment, this slap, was the boundary crossed, the final cruelty I could never forgive. I rose slowly, feeling the eyes of the entire ballroom pierce me like daggers. Tears blurred my vision, but inside something shifted forever. That blow to my face was not merely a slap. It was a declaration of war. For years I had hidden in humility, kept myself small, careful, discreet. But I carried secrets no one, not even Ethan, had ever known. As I turned toward the exit, my heart pounded with memories. I had buried memories that demanded to rise tonight. Juliet had no idea whom she had just struck. Juliet had started bringing real estate magazines and brochures for senior communities. "I'm just exploring options for you, Aurora. I want to make sure you have the best quality of life possible," she would say, spreading the materials on my coffee table as if it were a business negotiation. But I had been doing my own research. One afternoon, when they went out to run wedding errands, I decided to call in Riley Forrells, old friend who worked in real estate. "Amelia, I need you to investigate something for me." I told her, "There's a couple who are very interested in my apartment, and I want to know more about their real financial situation." What I discovered chilled me to the bone. Juliet and Ethan were neck-deep in debt. The wedding they were planning cost more than $50,000, completely financed with credit cards and personal loans. The apartment they were renting was on the verge of eviction for non-payment. The luxury cars they drove were financed with payments they couldn't afford. Their lifestyle was a facade built on suffocating debt. Everything started to make sense. The rush to get married, the insistence that I move, the constant comments about my economic vulnerability. It wasn't love that had united this couple. It was the desperate need to find a solution to their financial problems. And my apartment, located in one of the most exclusive areas of the city, was their lifeline. The revelation hit me like a slap to the soul. My son, the boy I had raised with values of honesty and hard work, had chosen the easy path of manipulation and deceit. He had allowed an ambitious woman to convince him to see his own mother as a resource to be exploited instead of a person to be loved and respected. In the weeks leading up to the wedding, their attempts became more aggressive. "Aura, you can't keep being so selfish," Juliet had said to me just 3 days before the ceremony. "Ethan and I have sacrificed so much for this marriage. The least you can do is help us with housing." Her words no longer even wore the mask of fake concern. It was a direct demand disguised as a family favor. That night, I had made a decision that would change everything. I called Carlos, my financial advisor and the only man I had, completely trusted since my husband Robert's death. Carlos, I need you to prepare some documents. It's possible I'll very soon have to reveal information I've kept secret for years. His voice had become serious immediately. Mrs. Hughes, are you sure this is the right time? He had warned me, with the wisdom of someone who had handled my affairs for more than a decade. Once this information is public, you can't take it back. The consequences could be devastating for family relationships. But I had already made up my mind. The family I had tried to protect with my silence had chosen to betray me, and now, sitting in my car in the ballroom parking lot, waiting for Carlos to arrive with the documents that would change everything, I realized the moment of truth had come. 25 more minutes, and Juliet, Ethan, and all those guests who had looked at me with pity would discover who Aurora Hughes really was. 25 more minutes, and their perfect worlds built on lies and greed would crumble, like sandcastles. The night breeze rustled the tree leaves around the parking lot, creating dancing shadows. Under the lights, it was strangely poetic that on such a beautiful night, so many illusions were about to die forever. 20 minutes had passed since my call to Carlos, and every second felt like an eternity. From my car, I could see the golden lights of the ballroom, hear the cheerful music and laughter spilling out of the open windows. It was surreal to think that in just a few minutes, that celebration would turn into a nightmare for the main players. I closed my eyes and let the most painful memories of the last few months flood my mind. I needed to remember exactly why I had reached this point of no return. The biggest humiliation had happened just 2 weeks before the wedding, during what Juliet had called an important family meeting. She had arrived at my apartment, accompanied not only by Ethan but also by her parents, a perfectly planned ambush. Aurora, I want to talk to you about your future. Juliet's mother, an haughty woman who looked at me as if I were a bothersome insect, had begun. We believe it's time for you to make responsible decisions about your life, continued Juliet's father, a burly man who had surveyed my apartment with the eyes of an appraiser, evaluating a property. At your age, living alone in such a big place is not only unnecessary, but dangerous. What if you have a medical emergency and no one finds out for days? Their words were rehearsed, too perfect to be spontaneous. Ethan had remained silent throughout the conversation, nodding occasionally like a well-trained puppet. Seeing him there, sitting next to a family that treated me like an obstacle, was like watching the sun I had raised before my eyes. Mom, he finally said in a voice I no longer I recognized. They're right. Juliet and I have been talking, and we think it would be better for everyone if you move to a place more appropriate for your age. Appropriate for my age, I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside. Me. And who gets to decide what's appropriate for me? You, Juliet's mother, exchanged a knowing look with her husband, as if my words confirmed something they had already discussed. Aurora, we understand this can be difficult to accept, but you must think about what's best for Ethan and Juliet. What's best for them? I murmured, beginning to understand the true dimension of the conspiracy that had been woven behind my back. And I suppose my apartment would be perfect for them to start their married life, right? The awkward silence that followed my question was all the answer I needed. They had planned every detail of this conversation, every argument, every psychological pressure. Juliet took control at that moment, deploying her full arsenal of emotional manipulation. Aurora, it's not just about the apartment, it's about your well-being. We've been doing research, and we found a wonderful residence for people your age. It has 24-hour medical services, social activities, prepared meals. You can make friends with people who understand what you're going through. Her fake smile made me nauseous. What I'm going through? I asked, feigned confusion. And what exactly do you think I'm going through, Juliet? She looked at Ethan for support before answering. Well, Loneliness, financial uncertainty, the fear of not being able to take care of yourself. It's normal at your age. Aurora, you don't have to be ashamed of needing help. The audacity of this 8-year-old woman telling me what was normal at my age left me speechless for a moment. But then I saw something in her eyes that chilled me. The absolute certainty that she had a right to my life, my home, my decisions. To her, I was no longer a person with autonomy, but an obstacle to be removed with as little resistance as possible. We've run the numbers. Juliet's father continued, pulling out a folder they had clearly prepared in advance. The cost of the residence would be approximately $2,500 a month. With the sale of your apartment, you'd have enough money to cover it for many years, and there would still be some left over to help Ethan and Juliet with their initial marriage expenses. There it was, the naked, raw truth. It wasn't about my well-being or my safety. It was about money. It was about converting my home into cash to finance their unsustainable lifestyle. And if I refuse, I asked, although I already knew the answer. Aurora, Ethan said, his voice sounding rehearsed. We hope it won't be necessary to take more drastic measures. But if your mental health deteriorates to the point that you can't make rational decisions, the implicit threat was crystal clear. If I didn't cooperate voluntarily, they would seek legal ways to declare me incompetent. They had done their internal research. They had planned. They had prepared the ground to take everything I owned by force if necessary. The son I had raised with so much love was sitting right there, allowing strangers to threaten his own mother. That night, after they left with my firm refusal, I cried for the first time in years, not out of sadness, but for the definitive death of the illusions I had held about my family. I had called Carlos immediately. I need you to investigate something urgently, I had told him through tears. I want to know exactly what the real financial situation is for my son and his fiancée. Everything. Debts, income, liabilities, everything. The results of that investigation had been devastating. Ethan earned $45,000 annually as a sales manager, but had debts of more than $80,000 on credit cards. Juliet worked part-time as an image consultant, making maybe $4,000 a year, but spent as if she had an executive salary. Together, they owed more than $120,000, not counting the loans they had taken out for the wedding. The apartment they rented for $2,000 a month was 3 months behind on payments. The cars they drove were financed with payments that took up 60% of their combined income. Their main credit card was maxed out, and they had started using cash advances to pay other debts. They were in a financial freefall, and my apartment represented their only hope of salvation. But there was something else in Carlos's report that had completely broken my heart. For the past 6 months, Ethan had been regularly calling banks and insurance companies, asking about loans against his elderly mother's property. He had been asking about legal procedures to obtain financial power of attorney over senior citizens. My own son had been planning my systematic dispossession for months. The most painful information had come at the end of the report. According to a private investigator Carlos had hired, Juliet had been telling her friends that she had sacrificed herself by getting engaged to an older, less attractive man, because his mother had valuable properties and no competitive heirs. To her, marrying Ethan wasn't love. It was a strategic investment in my estate. That revelation had been the final straw. For weeks, I had considered simply revealing my true financial situation to them, thinking that maybe the shock would make them reconsider their behavior. But after reading that report, I understood that it wasn't about money or desperation. It was about a pure, calculated greed that had corrupted my son until he was unrecognizable. The days leading up to the wedding had been torture. Every phone call from Ethan was a new pressure to reconsider my position. Every visit from Juliet included poisonous comments about my stubbornness and selfishness. They had started to treat me as if I were already a senile old woman whose opinions didn't matter. The night before the wedding, Ethan had made his last attempt. "Mom, tomorrow is..." the most important day of my life. Please don't ruin it by being difficult. Juliet just wants what's best for all of us." His words had been the final confirmation that I had lost my son forever. The man who was getting married the next day was no longer the boy I had, raised with so much love and sacrifice, and now sitting in my car waiting for Carlos. I realized that everything had led to this inevitable moment. It wasn't about revenge or cruelty. It was about justice. It was about showing them the consequences of their actions. It was about teaching them that some lines should never have been crossed. Add her 15 more minutes, and everything would change. Forever. My hands trembled as I dialed the number for Joseph, my neighbor from the apartment next door, a 70-year-old man who had been a silent witness to all the tense visits of the last few months. "Joseph, it's Aurora. I need to ask you for a very important favor," I said, my voice shaking. "Could you go to my percented apartment and bring me the brown folder from the second drawer of my desk?" "Yes, right now. It's urgent." Joseph had been like a brother to me since Robert passed away, and I knew I could trust him without him asking questions. While I waited, I remembered the conversation I had with Joseph just a week earlier. He had witnessed from his balcony when Juliet arrived with a real estate appraiser without notifying me. "Aurora, that girl brought a man with a briefcase who was measuring your apartment from the outside," he had told me with obvious concern in his voice. "When they saw me, they left quickly. I don't like what's happening at all." Joseph had been the first to notice the subtle changes in Ethan's behavior over the last few months. "Your son doesn't greet me like he used to," he had observed. "He used to stay and chat with me when he came to visit. Now he rushes in and out as if he's ashamed of something." His words had confirmed what my heart already knew. I had lost my son long before the slap that night. The folder I had asked Joseph for contained documents no one in my family had ever seen. Bank certificates, property, titles, investment records that Robert and I had kept secret for decades. Documents that proved the poor widow living on a modest pension was actually a woman with enough resources to change lives with a single decision. 10 minutes later, Joseph appeared in the parking lot with the folder in his hands. "Aura, what's going on? You look very upset," he asked as he handed me the documents. "It has to do with Ethan's wedding." I explained briefly what had happened in the ballroom, and I saw his face harden with every detail. "That woman is a viper," he muttered. "I always knew it." "Joseph, in a few minutes, a man named Carlos will arrive. When you see him, tell him I'm waiting for him here," I asked. "And Joseph, after tonight, many things are going to change. I want you to know you have always been like family to me." His eyes filled with tears as he nodded. "You're family to me too, Aurora. Do what you have to do." As Joseph returned to the building, I opened the folder and began to review documents I hadn't looked at in months. The first was a bank statement showing a balance of $5,400,000 in an investment account. The second was the property title for a downtown office building that generated monthly rent of Wuwen. The third was the deed to a beach house I had bought as an investment 10 years ago. Robert had been a genius at investments, starting with a small import business and turning it into a silent empire. Together, we had made the decision to live modestly to protect our privacy and our family security. Visible wealth attracts problems. Robert used to say, "Invisible wealth gives you power." I never imagined I would have to use that power against my own son. Each document in that folder represented years of hard work and smart decisions. The flower shop where I worked 3 days a week wasn't because I needed the money, but because I liked to stay active and connected to the community. The old car I drove wasn't due to economic limitations, but because I had learned that unnecessary ostentation only brings problems. My apartment, the one Juliet so coveted, was actually the least valuable property in my portfolio. I had bought it not for its economic value, but for the memories it held. It was ported where Robert and I had spent our last years together, where we had planned our future, where he had passed away in my arms after a brave battle with cancer. But there was something else in that folder that would change everything for Ethan and Juliet. For the last 3 years, since my son had started having financial problems, I had been secretly paying many of his debts. The credit card payments he thought came from a work bonus were actually coming out of my account. The special discount on his rent that he had negotiated with his landlord was money I transferred monthly. Without Ethan knowing, I had been subsidizing his irresponsible lifestyle for years. The luxurious apartment he lived in, the car he drove, even some of the expenses for the wedding that was taking place at that very moment had been made possible by my secret financial support. I had thought I was helping my son through a difficult time, not realizing I was financing his transformation into a person I didn't recognize. The bank records showed monthly transfers totaling $4,500 that had kept the sinking ship of Ethan's financial life afloat. Money he thought came from work, bonuses or tax refunds, when in reality it was his mother desperately trying to protect him from the consequences of his irresponsible decisions. The irony was devastating. While Juliet was humiliating me for being an economic burden on their future marriage, I was literally the only reason they could afford that marriage. While they were planning to strip me of my apartment to solve their financial problems, I had been solving those problems in secret for years. I closed the folder and looked toward the ballroom once more. The lights were still shining. The music was still playing. The guests were still celebrating. But in less than 5 minutes, Carlos would arrive with the final documents I needed. In less than 5 minutes, the process of cutting all the financial threads I had used to protect a son who had chosen to betray me would begin. This is not revenge, I reminded myself. This is justice. This is about teaching them that actions have consequences, that greed has a price, that family is not something you can sell for economic convenience. I had tried to protect Ethan from reality for too long, and that protection had corrupted him until he was unrecognizable. Headlights of a car approached the parking lot, illuminating the night with a white light that momentarily blinded me. It was Carlos, punctual as always, arriving with the documents that would change everything forever. I got out of my car and walked toward him, feeling how each step took me further away from the Aurora I had been and closer to the woman I needed to become. Mrs. Hughes, Carlos said as he got out of his car, a legal brief under his arm. Are you completely sure about this? Once we go in there will be no way to undo what is about to happen. I looked toward the ballroom one last time, where my son and his new wife were probably still celebrating their victory over the useless old woman they had just humiliated. I have never been more sure of something in my life, Carlos. It's time for them to meet the real Aurora Hughes. Carlos opened his folder under the Gamenet parking lot light and began to show me the documents he had prepared with his characteristic efficiency. Mrs. Hughes, here is the order for the immediate suspension of all bank transfers you have been making in Ethan. Hughes's name, he said, pointing to the first paper. Also, here is the notice of cancellation of the lease agreement that you had confidentially guaranteed. The landlord will receive this document tomorrow morning. I took the papers with trembling but determined hands. Each document represented a thread that I had, carefully woven for years to protect my son. And now I was cutting those threads, one by one. And the payment for the ballroom? I asked, although I already knew the answer. Cancelled? Carlos confirmed. The deposit you had, guaranteed, will be withdrawn tonight. They will have until tomorrow to find an alternative form of payment. The magnitude of what I was about to do hit me like a cold wave. For 3 years, I had been the invisible safety net that had kept Ethan and Juliet's lives afloat. The apartment they lived in, the car he drove, even the wedding that was taking place at that very moment had all been made possible by my secret financial support. And now, in a single night, I was going to withdraw all that support definitively. Carlos, I want you to understand something, I said to him as I signed. Each document with a determination I hadn't felt in years. This is not cruelty or revenge. This is the only way for them to learn the real value of things. For too long, I protected them from the consequences of their actions, and that protection corrupted them into people I don't recognize. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Hughes, Carlos replied with genuine respect in his voice. In my 30 years as a financial advisor, I have seen many families destroyed by greed and ingratitude. What you are doing requires more courage than most people possess. His words gave me the final strength I needed to take the last step. We walked together toward the ballroom entrance, and with each step, I could feel my heart beating faster. It wasn't nervousness I felt. It was a strange mix of sadness for what I had lost and anticipation for what I was about to regain. My dignity, my self-respect, my right to be treated as a human being instead of as a resource to be exploited. The music stopped. Abruptly, when we entered the ballroom, 130 pairs of eyes turned toward us, and I could see the confusion on the guests' faces. Some recognized Carlos immediately. After all, he had handled the financial affairs of several prominent families in the city for decades. His presence at social events usually meant that something important was about to happen. Juliet was the first to react. "What are you doing?" "Here, Aurora," she shouted at me from the center of the dance floor, where she had been posing for photos with Ethan. "You already left once. Wasn't that enough drama for one night?" Her voice carried that arrogance I had come to know so well, but I could detect a note of nervousness that hadn't been there before. "Ladies and gentlemen," Carlos said in a clear, professional voice, "I apologize for interrupting this celebration, but I have urgent legal matters to discuss with Mr. Ethan Hughes and Mrs. Juliet Dawson." The silence that followed was so deep you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. Some guests began to pull out their cell phones, sensing they were about to witness something extraordinary. Ethan slowly approached, his face pale and his eyes full of confusion. "What's going on here, Mom?" he asked me in a voice that no longer sounded as confident as it had when he had humiliated me just minutes before. "Who is this man, and why is he talking about legal matters?" I could see his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his tie, a nervous gesture he had had since childhood. "Ethan," I said in a voice firmer than it had sounded in 2 months. "This is Carlos Jones, my financial and legal advisor. He has come to deliver some documents that I think you will find very enlightening." Carlos opened his folder and took out the first document. "Mr. Ethan Hughes, you are hereby notified that the financial guarantee your mother had provided for your lease agreement has been immediately canceled. Your landlord will be notified tomorrow morning, and you will have 30 days to find a new guarantor or vacate the property." All the color drained from Ethan's face. "Financial guarantee," he murmured, looking at me with eyes that were beginning to fill with comprehension and horror. "Mom, what is he talking about?" But I could see from his expression that a part of him already knew. For years, he had suspected that his financial luck wasn't completely natural, but he had chosen not to ask questions because the answers might have been uncomfortable. Also, Carlos continued relentlessly. "The monthly transfers of $4,500 that your mother had been making to your personal accounts have been permanently suspended. This includes payments for credit cards, car insurance, and various other expenses that you believed were being covered by other sources." Juliet let out a gasp that echoed throughout the ballroom. "That's impossible," she exclaimed, running toward us, her wedding dress dragging on the floor. "Ethan doesn't have a rich mother. Look how she lives. Look at her. Clothes, her car. She's an old woman living on a miserable pension." Her hysteria was evident, and several guests began to murmur among themselves with increasing fascination. Finally, Carlos said, taking the last document from his folder, "The guaranteed payment for this celebration has also been canceled. The ballroom management will have the right to demand full payment before guests can leave tonight." His words fell on the ballroom like a bomb, and I could see some guests nervously begin to move toward the exits. The realization hit Ethan like a hammer. "You," he muttered, looking at me with eyes that couldn't fully process what they were hearing. "You've been all this time. You've been paying for everything." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment, I saw the small boy he had once been, vulnerable and confused. "For 3 years, Ethan," I confirmed in a voice that sounded strangely calm after the emotional storm I had been living through. 3 years in which I thought, I was helping you get through a difficult time. 3 years in which I believed you would eventually recover and become the man I raised. 3 years in which I hoped you would remember the values I taught you." Juliet began to pace in circles, clutching her head with increasing desperation. "This can't be happening. This can't be real." She screamed as the guests watched her with a mix of horror and morbid fascination. "You're a poor old woman. You work at a flower shop. You drive a 10-year-old car. You can't have money. Appearances are deceiving, Juliet," I said finally, feeling decades of careful performance come to an end. "For years I chose to live simply because my husband and I believed that visible wealth attracts problems. It turns out we were right. It's just that the problems came from where we least expected them." The music had stopped completely, and the only sound in the ballroom was the agitated breathing of the newlyweds and the growing murmurs of the guests, who were beginning to understand that they were witnessing something completely unexpected. Some were already recording with their phones, instinctively knowing that this story would become urban legend. "Mom," Ethan said, his voice broken. "Please, there has to be some way to fix this. The wedding, the guests, everything." But I could see in his eyes that he was finally beginning to understand the magnitude of what he had lost. Not just money or financial support. He had lost his mother, the woman who had loved him unconditionally for 35 years. The only way to fix this, Ethan, I replied, was not to break it in the first place. The silence in the ballroom became deafening. 130 guests held their breath as they processed what they had just heard. Juliet stood motionless for the first time all night, her eyes darting between Carlos, the documents, and my face, as if trying to find a crack in the reality that was collapsing around her. Ethan just stared at me with an expression I will never forget, a mixture of shock, belated comprehension, and absolute horror. "Mrs. Hughes," Carlos said in a voice loud enough for everyone to hear, "would you like me to proceed with reading the full financial details?" His question hung in the air like a sword over the newlyweds' heads. I could see several guests moving closer, fascinated by the drama unfolding before their eyes. "Please, Carlos," I replied with a serenity I didn't know I possessed. "I think everyone deserves to know the full truth." Juliet tried to interrupt with a desperate shriek, but Carlos raised a suppliant hand and continued with the precision of a surgeon performing a delicate operation. Over the last 36 months, Carlos began consulting his documents. "Mrs. Aurora, Hughes has transferred a total of $162,000 to cover the living expenses of her son, Ethan Hughes, and his fiancée. This includes $48,000 for rent payments, $44,000 for credit card payments, $18,000 for vehicle insurance, and $22,000 for miscellaneous expenses." A collective murmur swept through the ballroom. Some guests exchanged glances of astonishment, others pulled out calculators on their phones to verify the figures. Juliet's mother, who had remained seated at the head table throughout the confrontation, slowly stood up, her face completely pale. Furthermore, Carlos continued relentlessly, "Mrs. Hughes personally guaranteed the total cost of this celebration, including the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography, for an amount of $53,000. Money which, as I mentioned earlier, is no longer available to cover these expenses." Juliet finally found her voice, but what came out was more of a wail than coherent words. "This is impossible. It's a lie. No one can have so much money and live like a pauper." She turned to the guests as if looking for support, but found only fascinated faces and some who were clearly amused. by her desperation. "My dear Juliet," I said with a calm that contrasted dramatically with her hysteria, "you have just learned a very valuable lesson about judging people by appearances. For years, I chose to live simply because my husband, Robert, and I valued privacy above ostentation. It turned out to be a very wise decision." Ethan finally reacted, approaching me with hesitant steps. "Mom, please, there has to be an explanation. There has to be a way to resolve this. You can't destroy my life like this." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I felt a pang of maternal pain that almost made me waver. "Destroy your life?" I repeated, feeling the anger begin to boil inside me again. "I'm destroying your life. Wasn't it your wife who slapped me in front of 130 people? Wasn't it you who stood by without saying a word while I was being humiliated? Wasn't it you who planned to strip me of my home?" The truth of my words resonated in the ballroom like church bells. Several guests nodded, clearly remembering the scene that had started all this drama. Some even had videos on their phones of the slap Juliet had given me, digital evidence of the cruelty that had triggered this revelation. "But that was different," Ethan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. "We didn't know. We didn't understand. We thought you really needed help." His excuses sounded pathetic even to himself, and I could see some guests exchanging looks of contempt. "You didn't know?" I asked, my voice rising, for the first time all night. "You didn't know you were planning a family ambush to pressure me into selling my home. You didn't know you had brought a real estate appraiser without my knowledge. You didn't know you had been investigating legal ways to declare me incompetent if I didn't cooperate." With each question, Ethan's posture shrank. Carlos took advantage of the moment to pull another document from his folder. "Mr. Hughes, I must also inform you that your mother has decided to amend her will. All assets that were previously designated for you to inherit have been redirected to charities dedicated to protecting seniors from family abuse." The impact of this declaration was like a silent explosion. Juliet staggered backward, as if she had been physically hit. "You can't do that!" she shrieked, her mask of composure finally falling. "Completely. We're your family. Ethan is your only son. You can't disinherit him over a stupid fight." "A stupid fight?" I repeated, letting the words hang in the tension-filled air. "Is that how you describe a family conspiracy to strip an old woman of her home? Is that how you justify slapping your husband's mother on her own wedding day?" My voice had turned icy, and I could see some guests flinch. Juliet's father, who had remained silent throughout the confrontation, finally approached with an expression of poorly disguised panic. "Mrs. Hughes, I think we're all a little upset by the emotions of the day. Maybe we could discuss this in private when things have calmed down a bit." His tone was that of a man who had just realized he had bet on the wrong horse. "There's nothing to discuss in private," I replied firmly. "Everything I had to say has been said here in front of the same people who witnessed my humiliation. I chose to make this public, so my response will be public." The guests' heads moved between us, as if watching a tennis match, absorbed in every exchange. Carlos closed his folder with a dry snap that echoed throughout the ballroom. "Mrs. Hughes, all documents have been delivered and explained. The legal effects will begin immediately." He turned to Ethan and Juliet with a professional expression, but not without a certain satisfaction. "I suggest you contact your own legal and financial advisors as soon as possible." Juliet finally collapsed. She literally dropped into a nearby chair and began to cry with uncontrolled sobs that echoed through the ballroom. "Everything is ruined," she murmured through her tears. "Everything we planned, everything we worked for. It's all destroyed." Her wedding dress, once immaculate, was now wrinkled and stained with tears. "No," I said, approaching her for the first time since the slap. "What's destroyed are the lies, the greed, and the lack of respect. What's destroyed is the illusion that you can treat people like objects and expect there to be no consequences." I stopped in front of her, forcing her to look up. This is what happens when you mistake kindness for weakness. Ethan went to his wife and placed a trembling hand on her shoulder. Juliet, we have to find a way to fix this. There has to be something we can do. But even as he spoke, I could see in his eyes that he knew it was too late. Some bridges once burned cannot be rebuilt. There is a way to fix this, Ethan, I said, looking him directly in the eyes for the first time in months without feeling pain. You can learn from this. You can grow from this. You can become the people I hoped you would be before greed corrupted you. My voice softened slightly because despite everything, he was still my son. But that growth will have to happen without my financial help, without my apartment, and without my inheritance. You will. I have to do it the hard way, like everyone else does. The ballroom remained in absolute silence, every person present knowing that they were witnessing the definitive end of a family relationship. Carlos and I headed toward the exit, leaving behind a ballroom full of shocked guests and a newlywed couple whose perfect world had collapsed in less than 30 minutes. As Carlos and I walked toward the exit, the silence behind us was interrupted by a voice I didn't expect to hear. Wait, Aurora. It was Lucy, Ethan's younger sister, who had been sitting at a table in the back throughout the confrontation. She ran toward us with tears in her eyes and an expression of absolute horror on her face. Aunt. Aurora, Lucy said in a trembling voice. I didn't know anything about this. I swear, Ethan never told me what they were planning with you. Lucy had always been my favorite niece, a 9-year-old who worked as a teacher and had maintained a close relationship with me even after Ethan had distanced himself. If I had known what they were going to do to you, I would have tried to stop them. I stopped and looked at her, seeing in her eyes the same honesty I had known since she was a little girl. I know, Lucy, I said softly, placing a hand on her cheek. You have always been different. You've never seen people as opportunities or resources to be exploited. Her tears fell harder as she nodded, clearly devastated by her brother's actions. But why did you never tell us about the money? Lucy asked with genuine confusion. Why did you keep all this a secret for so many years? It was a question that deserved an honest answer, especially coming from someone who had always treated me with respect and genuine love. Because your Uncle Robert and I learned a long time ago that money changes. People, I explained as some guests discreetly moved closer to listen. We have seen families destroyed by inheritances, friendships ended by loans, and children who see their parents as walking pensions. We decided to live simply to protect the relationships that really mattered. Lucy nodded slowly, beginning to understand the wisdom behind my decisions. But Ethan, he was different. Before, when we were kids, he would have defended anyone who hurt you. What happened to him? Her question contained all the pain of a sister who had watched her brother transform into someone unrecognizable. What happened to him was Juliet, I replied with sadness, but without bitterness. What happened to him was greed disguised as love, ambition, without values, and me in my effort to protect him, depriving him of the chance to learn important lessons about responsibility and consequences. My answer resonated through the ballroom, where the guests were still engrossed in every word. Carlos had respectfully stayed to the side during this exchange, but now he approached and murmured something in my ear. Mrs. Hughes, the ballroom manager, is approaching. It seems he's already found out about the cancellation of the guaranteed payment. Indeed, I could see a burly man in a suit walking toward us with several papers in his hands and a very serious expression. Mrs. Hughes, the manager, said in a tense voice, I just received a payment cancellation notice that is highly irregular. The contract for this celebration is guaranteed until tomorrow morning. Can you explain what's happening here? His presence added a new layer of immediate reality to the crisis I had just triggered. Mr. Martinez, I replied, remembering his name from the conversations we had when I secretly arranged the wedding payment, the financial guarantee I provided for. This celebration has been revoked due to extraordinary circumstances that have come to light tonight. I gestured toward Ethan and Juliet, who remained in the center of the ballroom like statues of despair. I understand, Martinez said, looking at the scene with the experience of someone who had handled social events for decades. And who will be responsible? For the payment now? The total outstanding amount is $53,000, including the ballroom, food, music, flowers, and photography services. His voice was professional but firm, making it clear that someone would have to solve this problem immediately. Ethan finally reacted, approaching us with hesitant steps. "Mr. Martinez, there must be some misunderstanding. My mom, she can't just cancel the payment like that. We're family. This can be resolved." His voice carried a desperation I had never heard before. The desperation of a man who finally understood the magnitude of his situation. "Young man," Martinez said, with the forced patience of a professional. "The financial guarantee was provided by Mrs. Hughes personally and privately. She has the legal right to withdraw that guarantee at any time. I now need someone to provide an alternative form of payment immediately, or I will be forced to suspend the event." Juliet approached, stumbling, her wedding dress now completely disheveled, and her makeup smeared with tears. "You can't do this," she yelled at Martinez. "It's our wedding day. You can't ruin our wedding day over money problems." Her hysteria was evident, and several guests began to murmur among themselves with increasing discomfort. "Ma'am," Martinez replied with growing firmness, "I am not ruining anything. I am simply following the contractual terms that you signed. If you cannot provide an alternative payment immediately, I will have to ask all guests to leave and suspend all services." His ultimatum fell on the ballroom like a final sentence. The reality of the situation began to penetrate the minds of the guests. Some had already started to grab their bags and discreetly head for the exits. Others remained fascinated by the drama that continued to unfold, like spectators of a traffic accident they couldn't look away from. "Mom," Ethan said, approaching me with tears in his eyes for the first time since he was a child. "Please, I know what we did was wrong. I know we hurt you, but there are 130 people here. There are photos, there are memories. You can't destroy all this over a fight." His voice broke on the last word, and for a moment I saw the little boy he had once been. "Ethan," I replied with a calm that surprised me, "I am not destroying anything. You destroyed this. When you chose greed over love. When you chose manipulation over honesty. When you chose to publicly humiliate me. Instead of treating me with the respect I deserve as your mother." Each word was like a dagger, but they were words that needed to be said. "But what are we going to do?" Juliet asked in a desperate voice, looking at the guests who continued to leave the ballroom. "How are we going to explain this? How are we going to pay for all of this?" Her panic was evident, and I could see she was finally starting to understand the real implications of her actions. "I'm going to do what all responsible people do," I replied. "You're going to find ways to earn money honestly. You're going to learn to live within your means. You're going to discover what it means to work hard for the things you want, instead of expecting others to provide them for you." My voice had grown stronger, and I could feel decades of accumulated wisdom pouring out through my words. Carlos approached discreetly and murmured, "Mrs. Hughes, the legal process is complete. All documents have been delivered and explained. There is nothing more we can do here." His message was clear. It was time to leave, to let Ethan and Juliet face the consequences of their decisions without my presence as a distraction. Lucy approached once more and hugged me tightly. "Aunt Aurora, I want you to know that you will always have my respect and my love, no matter what happens with Ethan." Her words were like a balm for my wounded heart, reminding me that not all family had been corrupted by greed. And you will always have mine, Lucy," I replied, returning the hug. "Remember this night when you make important decisions in your life. Remember that character is defined not by what we have, but by how we treat the people we love." Her tears soaked my shoulder as she nodded, completely understanding the lesson that was unfolding before her eyes. Martinez approached again, this time with greater urgency. "Ladies and gentlemen, I need an immediate resolution. I have other commitments tonight, and I cannot keep staff here indefinitely without a guarantee of payment." His professional patience was finally running out, adding additional pressure to an already desperate situation. "You have my phone number," I said to Ethan and Juliet for the last time. "When you are ready to have a real conversation about respect, values, and responsibility, when you have learned what it means to earn things for yourselves, when you can look me in the eye and offer me a genuine apology for what you did to me tonight, then we can talk. But for that," I added, looking at them directly, "first you will have to find a way to solve the mess you created here all on your own." With those words, I turned and walked toward the exit with Carlos, leaving behind a ballroom full of chaos, despair, and the harsh reality of deserved consequences. 3 days after the wedding, my apartment had become a refuge of peace I hadn't experienced in years. Joseph had come over every morning with coffee and pastries from the local bakery, making sure I was okay after what he called the night Aurora reclaimed her dignity. His visits had been a balm for my soul, reminding me that I still had chosen family who valued me for who I truly was. The phone had rung incessantly for these 3 days. Ethan had called 37 times, leaving messages that evolved from initial anger to desperate pleading. Juliet had sent 14 text messages, each more hysterical than the last. Her parents had shown up at my door twice, demanding that I fix the mess I had caused, but I had held my ground with a calmness that surprised even myself. Carlos arrived that morning with news that, while expected, was devastating in its full scope. "Mrs. Hughes," he had told me as we drank tea on my balcony, "I have received reports from all fronts. Ethan and Juliet were evicted from their apartment yesterday morning. The ballroom has initiated legal proceedings to recover the $53,000 owed. Their credit cards have been canceled for non-payment. And where are they living now?" I had asked, although a part of me already knew the answer. "With Juliet's parents," Carlos replied. "Apparently, it's a 2-bedroom apartment where 3 people already live. The situation is tense, according to my sources." His expression suggested that tense was a very conservative description of reality. That afternoon, while I was watering my plants on the balcony, I saw a familiar car park in lot of dollars, front of the building. It was Lucy, but this time she wasn't alone. With her was Amelia, my old friend from the real estate sector. And to my surprise, Joseph got out of the back seat. "Aura," Lucy yelled from the sidewalk, "we need to talk to you. There are things you need to know." When they arrived at my apartment, their faces wore a mixture of urgency and concern that immediately put me on alert. "At Aurora," Lucy began, "I've been investigating some things since the wedding night. Things I think you need to know before it's too late." She sat on my couch with a folder in her hands that looked as official as the one Carlos had carried to the ballroom. "Too late for what?" I asked, pouring her some tea while trying to stay calm. Amelia cleared her throat and spoke for the first time. "Aurora, for the last 3 days, I've been doing some digging into Ethan and Juliet's financial situation. What I found goes beyond what any of us imagined. They had been planning this for more than a year," Amelia continued, opening the folder to reveal documents that made me feel sick to my stomach. "I found evidence that Juliet had been consulting with lawyers specializing in mental competency cases for seniors. They had a detailed plan to legally declare you incompetent and gain control over all your properties." Joseph, who had remained silent until then, leaned forward with a grave expression. "Aurora, there's more. That night after you left the ballroom, I overheard Juliet talking on the phone with someone. She was saying that the old woman had ruined everything, but they still had Plan B." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "Plan B?" I repeated, feeling my stomach clench with a mixture of fear and anger. Lucy took my hand and squeezed it gently. "Aunt Aurora, they've been telling everyone you've gone senile, that the scene at the wedding was evidence that you've lost touch with reality. They're building a case for a judge to declare that you can't handle your own affairs." The magnitude of their betrayal expanded before me like an infected wound. It wasn't enough to have publicly humiliated me, to have planned to strip me of my home, to have conspired against me for months. Now they were trying to use my justified response to their cruelty as evidence of mental incompetence. It was a wickedness that surpassed anything I had imagined possible. But that's not all, Amelia added, her voice trembling. I've discovered that Juliet has been spreading rumors in the neighborhood about your erratic behavior. She has visited several of your neighbors, suggesting that they should report anything concerning they observe about you. The systematic nature of her defamation campaign left me breathless. Carlos, who had returned for our scheduled meeting, entered the apartment at that moment and found the atmosphere thick with tension. Mrs. Hughes, I see you've already found out about some of the recent maneuvers. His expression was more serious than I had ever seen it. I have some additional news that confirms what your friends have discovered. Ethan filed a preliminary petition yesterday, Carlos said, pulling documents from his own folder. He is requesting that a court evaluate your mental competency based on what he calls irrational behavior and erratic financial decisions. He has provided sworn statements from several witnesses who were present at the wedding. Sworn statements? I asked, feeling the anger begin to replace the shock. What kind of statements? Carlos consulted his papers. Before answering, statements describing your unjustified emotional outburst against an innocent young couple, statements characterizing your financial decisions as vengeful and destructive, statements suggesting that you have lost the ability to make rational decisions. Lucy squeezed my hand tighter. Aunt, Aurora, they've convinced several wedding guests to sign declarations. Most of them don't really understand what was going on that night. They just saw an old woman attacking newlyweds. Her voice contained all the frustration of someone who had seen the truth but felt powerless to make it prevail. But we have good news too. Joseph intervened with a smile that contrasted dramatically with the gravity of the plain situation. It turns out there are more people on your side than they imagine. He took out his own cell phone and showed me a screen that left me stunned. Joseph, what is this? I asked, looking at what appeared to be a social media video with thousands of views. Aurora, remember that several guests were recording that night? Well, some of those videos have gone viral. People aren't seeing a senile old woman attacking an innocent couple. They're seeing a dignified woman revealing the truth about years of abuse and manipulation. Amelia leaned in to look at the phone, too. Aurora, the comments on these videos are overwhelmingly in your favor. People are praising your courage, your dignity under pressure, your decision to set boundaries. Some are sharing their own stories of family abuse. You've become a symbol of resistance against the exploitation of seniors. Carlos nodded in approval. This public response will be invaluable if the case goes to court. It's difficult to argue that someone is mentally incompetent when thousands of people are applauding the logic and justice of their actions. His professional smile had returned, suggesting that perhaps the legal battle I wouldn't be as one-sided as I had initially feared. But there's something else you need to know, I said, making a prowl. A decision I had been considering for the last 3 days. If Ethan and Juliet want to play this game, if they want to turn this into a public legal battle, then they are going to discover exactly who they're messing with. I stood up and I walked to my desk where I had been preparing my own folder of documents. For these 3 days, I have been in contact with several lawyers specializing in elder abuse. I have been documenting everything. The intimidating visits, the implicit threats, the conspiracy to strip me of my property, even the slap Juliet gave me. I took out photographs of my swollen cheek taken immediately after the wedding. Medical evidence of the physical assault. If they want war, I continued with a determination I hadn't felt in decades. They will have war, but it will be a war fought on my terms, with my resources, and with the truth on my side. Furthermore, I added with a smile that surprised even myself, I have decided to do something I should have done years ago. I am going to tell my full story publicly. I am going to show the world exactly what happens when greed is disguised as family love. The room filled with a new energy. The energy of people who knew that justice was on their side and that they had the resources to make it prevail. 6 months after that night that divided my life, into a before and an after, I found myself sitting in the most important television studio in the city, waiting for the interview to begin that would tell my full story to the entire country. The program, Stories of a Gram, Lifetime, had contacted Carlos after the wedding videos had accumulated more than 2 million views on social media. My story had become a national symbol of resistance against family abuse of seniors. The journalist, Catherine Diaz, a woman respected for her professional integrity, reviewed her notes while the technicians made the final lighting adjustments. "Mrs. Hughes," she said to me with a warm smile, "I want you to know that you have inspired thousands of people with your courage. We have received hundreds of letters from viewers who have lived through similar situations during these 6 months. Many things had changed. The legal case Ethan and Juliet tried to build against me collapsed spectacularly when Carlos presented evidence of their conspiracy to declare me incompetent. Not only did they lose the case, but they were fined for legal frivolity and ordered to pay my attorney fees, which amounted to $45,000. The bankruptcy that followed was swift and devastating. Ethan had lost his job when his employer found out about the public scandal. Juliet had tried to start an image consulting business, but the viral videos had ruined her professional reputation. They were now living in a one-bedroom apartment in the suburbs, working part-time jobs and struggling to pay their accumulated debts. "We are on the air in 5 minutes," the program director announced. I looked at the cameras that would soon broadcast my story to millions of homes, feeling a mix of nervousness and determination. At my side was Carlos, who had agreed to appear with me to explain the legal aspects of the case. In the audience were Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, my pillars of support during these difficult months. The most painful thing about these 6 months had been Ethan's complete silence. After losing the legal case, he had made no attempt to contact me. There were no calls asking for forgiveness, no letters explaining his behavior, no acknowledgement that his actions had been wrong. It was as if he had decided that it was easier to hate me than to face the reality of what he had done. Juliet, on the other hand, had tried to contact me several times. Her messages had evolved from legal threats to desperate pleas for financial help. The last message received just 2 weeks earlier said, "Aurora, I know we make mistakes, but we're family. Ethan is sick with stress and I'm pregnant. Please, you can't let your grandchild grow up in poverty." The news of the pregnancy had been like a dagger to my heart. I was going to be a grandmother, but my grandchild would grow up in a home filled with resentment toward me. However, I had learned the most difficult lesson of my life. I couldn't save people who didn't want to be saved. Trying to do so only perpetuated their destructive behavior. "Mrs. Hughes, we'll start in 30 seconds, Catherine informed me. I took a deep breath and thought of all the people who had written to me after seeing the videos, telling me their own stories of family abuse, seniors whose children had taken control of their finances, parents emotionally blackmailed by irresponsible adult children, grandparents threatened with not seeing their grandchildren if they didn't provide financial support. We are live in 3, 2, 1. The red light on. The camera came on and Catherine began with an introduction she had rehearsed perfectly. "Good evening and welcome to Stories of a Lifetime. I am Catherine Diaz, and tonight we have with us Aurora Hughes, a 6'8" woman whose story has shocked the nation and put the issue of family abuse against seniors at the center of a national debate. Mrs. Hughes," Catherine continued, turning to me, 6 months after the events at your son's wedding, how does it feel to know that your story has inspired so many people? Her question was direct but compassionate, allowing me to start on my own terms. "I feel grateful," I replied, feeling my voice stabilize as I spoke. "Grateful that something as painful as the loss of my relationship with my son has served to help other people in similar situations. For months, I felt lonely and confused, wondering if I was the one who was wrong. Now I know that what I went through is more common than any of us would like to admit." Catherine nodded and consulted her notes. "Tell us about the years leading up to that night, when you started to realize that something wasn't right in your relationship with your son and his fiancée? It was the question I had been waiting for. The opportunity to explain how emotional and financial abuse develops gradually, almost imperceptibly. It started with small things, I explained, remembering those early signs I had ignored out of love, comments about my age, suggestions that I could no longer take care of myself, subtle pressures for me to make decisions that truly benefited them. Family abuse rarely begins with blows or shouting. It begins with the slow erosion of your self-confidence, with making you question your own reality. Carlos leaned forward to add legal context. What Aurora describes is a classic pattern we see in elder abuse cases. The perpetrators, especially when they are family members, use psychological manipulation tactics before proceeding to more direct forms of coercion. It's insidious because it's disguised as loving concern. And the moment of the revelation, Catherine asked, "When did you decide to expose the truth about your financial situation?" It was the question I knew would come, the one that required me to explain the most difficult decision of my life, the slap. I replied simply, "When Juliet slapped me in the middle of the ballroom in front of 130 people for refusing to hand over the keys to my apartment." I knew she had crossed a line I couldn't ignore. In that moment, I understood that it was no longer about protecting my family from the consequences of their actions. It was about protecting myself from continuing to be abused. The interview continued for 45 minutes, covering all aspects of my story. I talked about the decision to live simply, to protect my privacy, about the years of secret financial support I had provided, about the conspiracy to declare me incompetent, and about the legal battle that followed. Each answer was designed not only to tell my story, but to educate others about the warning signs and available resources. "Mrs. Hughes," Catherine said near the end of the program, "do you have a message for your son if he is watching this interview tonight?" It was the most difficult question, the one I had been both dreading and hoping for. I looked directly into the camera, knowing there was a chance Ethan was watching. "Ethan, if you are listening to this, I want you to know that I still love you. I will always love you because you are my son. But loving someone doesn't mean allowing them to abuse you. Loving someone doesn't mean sacrificing your dignity for their convenience. Loving someone doesn't mean becoming a victim of their greed. The doors to my heart will always be open for you," I continued, feeling tears begin to well up in my eyes. "But only if you can walk through them as the honorable man I tried to raise you to be, only if you can look me in the eye and accept full responsibility for your actions, only if you can show that you have learned that family is built on love and respect, not on opportunism and manipulation. And for all the people watching this who recognize their own story in mine," I added, addressing the broader audience, I want you to know that you have the right to be treated with dignity, no matter your age. You have the right to make your own decisions about your money, your home, your life. You have the right to set boundaries with family members who treat you badly. And you have the right to seek help when those boundaries are violated. When the cameras turned off, the studio erupted in applause from the production crew. Catherine hugged me with tears in her eyes. "Aurora, that was one of the most powerful interviews I have ever done. It's going to change lives." Carlos nodded proudly, knowing we had achieved something bigger than winning a legal case. That night, as I drove back to my the apartment with Joseph, Lucy, and Amelia, I felt more at peace than I had been in years. I had told my story. I had defended my truth. And I had used my pain to help others. No matter what the future held with Ethan, I knew I had done the right thing. "Aurora," Lucy said from the back seat, I am so proud of you. You have turned the worst experience of your life into something that will protect thousands of people." Her words resonated in my heart as we arrived home. The apartment that Juliet had once coveted now truly felt like a home again. Not because I had won a legal battle, but because I had finally learned to value myself enough to demand the respect I deserved. I had discovered that sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to be willing to lose it. And as I prepared for bed that night, I knew I had set the most important example of my life, that it's never too late to stand up for yourself, that you are never too old to demand dignity, and that true love sometimes requires the most difficult decisions. My story ended that night, but my life truly began again. 2 years have passed since the moment that split my world into before and after. And as I sit here, writing these words from the same balcony where I once watered my plants and swallowed silent humiliations in the name of a mother's love, I realize how different the world looks when you finally decide to place a price on your dignity. This morning began the way they all do now, with a call from Carmen, the coordinator of the Aurora Hughes Foundation for the Protection of Seniors. Yes, I gave the foundation my name, a name once whispered with pity, now carried with pride. "Aurora, we have 23 new cases this week," Carmen reported, her voice holding that blend of sorrow and resolve shared by all of us who fight this battle. The stories are heartbreakingly familiar. Adult children coercing aging parents for property, money, control. Each file I read is a reflection of my past. Yesterday, it was a 2-year-old woman convinced by her daughter to sell her home for her own good, only to watch the money vanish into a failed business and a European vacation. The day before, a 9-year-old father, threatened by his twin sons, "If you don't give us $50,000, you'll never see your grandchildren again." Every line, every testimony is a mirror I never asked for. And yet, I have turned the worst chapter of my life into the most purposeful one. The foundation has helped more than 400 seniors reclaim their property, their savings, and most sacred of all, their self-worth. Our team of lawyers, social workers, and psychologists offers the kind of support I once longed for when I thought I was utterly alone. Joseph, my faithful neighbor, is now my vice president. At 72, he stands taller than ever, giving lectures on how to detect manipulation within families. "Aurora," he told me just last week, "I never thought my golden years would turn me into a detective of broken families, but this is the best adventure of my life." Lucy moved into the apartment next door a year ago, newly divorced. Her brief marriage dissolved in only 8 months. She tells me often that she wanted to live close to the bravest person she knows. As the Foundation's Director of Education, she has discovered a calling she never found in traditional classrooms. "Aunt Aurora," she says with affection, "you taught me that family isn't always blood. It's the people who choose to honor you without conditions." My story, once whispered behind closed doors, has spread further than I ever imagined. The book I co-wrote with an investigative journalist, When Love Hurts, An Elderly Woman Fights Back, became a national bestseller. 200,000 copies sold. Every cent of the royalties goes straight to the foundation. Letters pour in from readers whose lives echo my own. Thousands of homes where silence had reigned for too long. Carlos, my steadfast advisor, now serves as the foundation's head accountant. His expertise, which saved me in my darkest hour, has helped us recover more than $3 million stolen by greedy family members. "Mrs. Hughes," he told me at our last meeting, "we are giving people back, not just money, but their freedom." The question everyone asks me, the one that slices deepest every time, is whether I miss Ethan. My answer is complicated. I miss the child he once was, the boy who laughed with unguarded joy. I miss the young man who, for fleeting moments, showed kindness and honor, but I do not miss the adult who betrayed me, manipulated me, and stood silent while I was destroyed in public. He has reached out exactly 3 times in 2 years. Once when a television interview embarrassed him at work, once when his son, my grandson, Oliver, was born, and once, 3 months ago, after Juliet abandoned him, taking the baby and half of everything he owned. Each time, his words were not apologies, but requests for money. His voice remains unchanged, always the victim of circumstance, never the author of his own downfall. The last time we spoke, he accused me, "Mom, your pride matters more than your grandson." My reply came calm but sharp as glass. "Ethan, my dignity matters exactly as much as my grandson, and I pray he learns that lesson better than you did. For the first time in my life, I hung up on my son, and for the first time I felt free. Only one subject still has the power to bring tears to my eyes, Oliver. 14 months old, unaware of who I am. Juliet took every photograph when she left, erasing even the images of his infancy. Still, I have opened a trust fund for him, managed by Carlos, to be released when he turns 18. Whether or not he knows me by then, he will know he was loved. Amelia, my closest confidant, often comforts me. Maybe one day Oliver will come looking for the truth himself. I cling to that hope. Strangely, my health has bloomed in the absence of toxic weight. The sleepless nights, the headaches, the trembling hands, all gone. My doctor marveled during my last appointment. "Aurora, your body has the stress markers of a woman 10 years younger." And he was right. I walk taller now. My voice carries more firmly. Even my reflection looks back at me with strength I thought I had lost. The flower shop where I once worked has closed, but I found new life in a community garden I helped to create. Teaching others about medicinal plants and the wisdom of the earth has grounded me more deeply than I ever dreamed possible. My days are full, 3 spent at the foundation, 2 visiting seniors in need, and weekends devoted to writing my second book this time, a guide to identifying and preventing family financial abuse. The apartment Juliet once coveted has become my sanctuary. Ethan's old room is now my office, its walls covered with thank you letters, family photos from those we've helped, and diplomas from universities where I've lectured. Each one is proof that the pain was not wasted. Margaret, 74, came to me 6 months ago after her son sold her car without permission to pay gambling debts. Last week, she sent me a photograph of herself beaming behind the wheel of a new car bought with money she reclaimed legally. Her letter read, "Aurora, you taught me that boundaries are survival, not cruelty. That self-love is not selfishness, but necessity. That it is never too late to stand tall." Her words remind me why everything, every slap, every tear, every lonely night was worth it. My story does not end with a picture-perfect family reconciliation. It ends with something far greater: authenticity, dignity, and peace. I have learned that the most radical form of love is to walk away from those who insist on breaking you. If I could send a message back to that broken woman walking out of the wedding ballroom 2 years ago, I would whisper, "Have courage. The pain will be unbearable, but on the other side waits a life more real, more luminous than you ever dreamed. Peace awaits you, the peace of knowing you will never again be disposable." Tonight, as I close these reflections, I face the future with hope. Tomorrow, I will sit with senators to discuss new laws to protect elders from abuse. Next week, I will cut the ribbon on our 3rd foundation center. Next month, I will begin filming a national documentary series to amplify voices like mine. At 70, my life is richer, freer, and more authentic than it ever was at 68. I now know the end of a toxic bond is not loss, it is liberation. Family can be inherited, yes, but it can also be chosen. And it is never too late to write the story of your own rebirth. So when people ask me, "Do you regret what you did that night?" my answer never changes. Did you like my story? And from which city are you listening? Tell me in the comments. If you enjoyed this story, you can support me with a super thanks so I can keep bringing you more stories like this. Thank you for your kindness. I look forward to your thoughts. On the screen, you'll see 2 more life stories I highly recommend. There is so much more waiting on my channel. Don't forget to subscribe. Until next time, another life story, told with love and with respect.